Welcome to Senior Living Live right here on Facebook. Tonight's topic is making the most out of the holidays. My name is Chris Harper and I'm with the Arbor Company, and I'm joined by my colleague Mary Campbell Jenkins. How are you doing tonight?
I'm
Mary
great.
Campbell?
It's good to be here.
Nice 8 p.m. on a nice Tuesday evening. So we're also joined by Mary Kate. Don't want to forget her. She is monitoring your comments that you leave online. And so if you're watching us live on Tuesday, December 12th, feel free to leave a comment or a question. We'll do our best to answer it. If you're watching the recording of this after the fact, which many of you may be doing that, we obviously won't be able to answer your questions live, but we'll do what we can to respond online quickly. So leave those comments and questions, and we'll try to get your questions answered. So who is Arbor? What in the world are we doing here? We're a senior living operator of communities, things like independent living, assisted living, and memory care. We've operated communities like these since 1988 and currently have the privilege of working at about a little more than 30 communities in 10 states right now. So Mary Campbell, when you started with the Arbor Company, how many communities and how many states were we in?
I think we had 7 communities and we were in 3 states.
So we've had a little bit of growth in that time. What year did you start with the Arbor Company?
It was the mid-90s.
There you go. There you go. So a little bit of growth since then. There was no Facebook Live.
There was not.
At the time. This is, we're stepping into new territory here, 21st century. Now, over the years, we've built up quite a bit of experience, and I think Mary Campbell can attest to that. So obviously Facebook Live, but the communities that we've built and the connections that we've made with families and with caregivers, I think has really made a big difference for us. So speaking of your experience since the mid-90s, since you've been in this line of work, it's been a little bit of time. Why have you stayed in senior living compared to maybe some other types of healthcare or other types of careers even?
It's a good question, and few people imagine that they're going to be in a career for over 20 years in this day and age. I'm surprised every day. But the truth is, I'm a huge believer in community and the power of community for people at all ages. And when I've seen firsthand the power of community to improve the life of a senior, it's really motivating to me to continue working towards creating communities that are life-giving to seniors, because getting older and needing help does not mean that your life stops, or that your life stops being interesting, or that you stop making new friends. And so really it's incredibly motivating to me to find ways to help people finish strong.
That's great. That's great. Well, so you've built up quite a bit of experience in the industry, and we want to bring that experience to you all at home. So we're going to talk about things that you can look for and things that you can think about when you're visiting the seniors in your life this holiday season. Chances are, if you're watching this, something maybe has struck you about your loved one recently, or maybe you're just planning a family get-together or planning a visit, and you're worried about what you might see. There's something in the back of your mind that just maybe doesn't feel quite right. We're going to give you some things to think about. This holiday period, Thanksgiving through New Year's and everything in between, it's a time when families get together. It's a time to reflect, to talk, connect with family members, but it's also a time to observe and to see things that maybe you might not ordinarily see during normal life outside of the holidays. We're busy. We're busy people. We have commutes. We have getting the kids to soccer and school and coordinating all of these things, and we don't necessarily have time to just sort of take a breath. And this is that time of year to do those reflections. So we want to give you some things to look out for during these times, and then what steps, if any, you should take next. Where should you go with those things that you may have noticed? So it sounds like we've got a lot to talk about. Now, the majority of what we're talking about tonight is in our free guide that you can download online. Now, you should see a link to this coming up on your screen here in a second. You can jot that down. Just go to arborcompany.com/holiday. Now, this is a fantastic guide that you can share with other members in your family. And for that matter, if you know of anyone who might find that guide helpful, please share it with them. If you think they would find this video helpful, please share that with them. We want as many people as possible to be equipped with this information. That is our primary goal. So, Mary Campbell, let's talk about the things to look out for. What should people look for when they're visiting their parents or grandparents over the holidays?
It's a great question. And earlier you mentioned how busy our lives are and how sometimes it's hard to stay abreast of what's happening. Sometimes we don't even live in the same state. So we're seeing folks, maybe once or twice a year who we're noticing change in. And that's the key word. I would say pay attention to the changes that you see. Okay. And those can happen across lots of different categories. So you may see physical changes in a parent, which is a totally normal part of aging, but pay attention to those changes. So let's say you're walking out to the mailbox with your mom and you notice that she's more winded than you remember her being. Or your dad has stiffness when he's getting out of the chair that makes it difficult for him to get up by himself. Or maybe you see a balance issue. These are all things that happen to us as our bodies age, but all of them can create new kinds of risks. So pay attention to the physical changes. Another easily observable change you might see is the physical environment. So I grew up with a parent who was, walking into my childhood home was like walking into a Martha Stewart magazine. So the day that I walk in and I see the plants are dead and there are 3 weeks of magazines, 3 weeks of newspapers piled up on the table, I know something has changed. So everybody's got their own context. Maybe you grew up with parents who were sort of happy and messy and all over the place. That wouldn't be a change for them. But whatever your context is, notice change in their environment. You might open the refrigerator door and say, wow, there's really no food in here. And they used to have a heaping, beaming refrigerator full of food all the time. Or you open it and you smell, wow, this bacon has been here way too long. Somebody's not noticing something. So that's a place to pay attention to. Another one has to do with memory. So you may notice your mom or dad telling the same story about Cousin Andy over and over. Pay attention. And some changes are more subtle than that. And they take a little bit more detective work on your part. So it may be that you used to look at the refrigerator posted to the calendar on the refrigerator, and you would see the book club and the bridge club. And this visit, you don't see anything on the calendar. It may be that your parents are sort of stepping back from a social life that they once enjoyed.
Yeah, and I know many seniors at this stage in their life live alone, and maybe you visit them and they seem happy, they seem content, they're doing well. It still looks like the Martha Stewart home. It's very organized, but they don't necessarily live these big social lives. Perhaps not what they once did. Is that just a product of getting older and friends moving away, or is there something else there? I mean, how important is that socialization for seniors?
That's a great question, and I think it goes back to this question of context. Who have they been? So if your parents have been traditionally sort of introverted folks and they tend to enjoy each other's company, but they don't tend to go out a lot, seeing them continue in those patterns is not a reason for concern. If, on the other hand, your mom or dad or grandparents have historically been more extroverted and had a lot of friends around, and you see that they really aren't up to date anymore with what their friends are doing, that's something to tune into. Social isolation is an incredible risk factor for seniors. It has more power in many ways than a number of diseases you might think of that can be life-limiting. So it's something to take really seriously, and I think it goes back to my feeling about the power of community. One of the things that we see over and over is people who have been isolated. Maybe a spouse has died, and they've lived at home, and their life has sort of contracted around them. It's a pretty small life. And when they move into one of our communities and begin to build relationships with caregivers and residents, they blossom in a way and sort of regain their own liveliness that they may have lost because they were really at home trying to make it work by themselves.
So perhaps the socialization aspect is a little more important than even the stinky milk and the fridge.
It is. I mean, I think its power, its impact on your lifespan and quality of life is much stronger than the stinky milk.
Wow. So you mentioned a lot of things, and it seems like the theme of that is change, is what has existed once in life and doesn't now, and what's normal and what isn't. What are the next steps? So if someone has seen some of these things, where do they go? What should they do next?
it's not as easy as it seems. We grow up caring for sort of the people around us, and you don't need to know about taking care of aging parents or aging grandparents until you need to know about it. And we don't come with this long sort of history of knowledge. So you have to learn pretty quickly what to do. And one of the first pieces of advice I would give you is talk to friends who also have aging parents. We tend to live in a world where we're often caring for children at home and our parents are getting older, and we have a peer group who's doing similar things. So someone has been through this recently. So that's a great resource, is to talk to folks and to understand, what needs they've had and how they've met them. And then there's a huge group of people whose lives are dedicated to caring for seniors. So those folks may be in senior living communities, and it's a great place to begin. You may not feel like you need it, and you may not need a senior living community, but the caregivers in those communities are dedicated to helping you figure out what you do need. So that's a resource. There are folks who are dedicated to helping your parents find help in their own homes by providing caregivers a few hours a day. Those folks can help you understand what the needs are and how you might meet them. And it goes all the way through. The spectrum continues all the way through hospice care. So there are a huge number of professionals who really are committed to providing assistance, and you could call any one of them, no matter whether you hit the right target, and they'll begin to help you think through what the needs might be.
Yeah. And before we went on the air, you were talking about, I think you made a really good point about how this is not something that people get good at over time and repeat. It's sort of a once-in-a-lifetime type of conversation and decision to have. And I think on top of that, the resources available have changed so much. So what you at home may have seen with your grandparents or your great-grandparents in the 80s and 90s is very different today. The resources available and the type of care options available it's just such a big change.
It's absolutely true, and we were talking just the other day about attitude shifts and changes when it comes to issues like dementia. And obviously dementia is a complex condition, and it comes from many different sources. But there are organizations now that have helped really destigmatize dementia. And one of the videos that we were watching and talking about was from a 57-year-old man who was living with dementia, but very aware of his diagnosis and really committed to living as full a life as he possibly could. And so there are organizations like the Dementia Action Alliance who want to educate people about dementia-related issues, but also want to support the people living with the disease. 20 years ago, people were not so open to recognizing, wow, I have this disease, and it's not the end of my life. It may be yet a long life, and so I'm going to live with this, and I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to help you understand what I need to be successful, and we're going to find all those ways that I can sort of hack this disease to some degree and stay engaged in my own life.
Yeah.
And that's a change that really, is fairly recent.
Yeah, I mean, even in society, we saw that with Glenn Campbell, the country music singer.
Yeah.
It's been so rare up to this point to have public figures, celebrities, to talk about these types of things. They would just kind of go into hiding, and he was very forthright with it. If you haven't seen that documentary, it's a great one to look at. Yeah. So how do you have that conversation? So kind of back to, you've seen some of these red flags, and do you go and talk to mom? Do you need to huddle with the family first? What do you recommend people do?
Yes, that's the tricky part. So you have a lot of ideas about what needs to happen, and now you've got to convince the people who you love and want to care for about what your good ideas are. And there's no right answer to that. You know your family dynamic better than anybody else. So I think one helpful strategy is, if you have siblings, to huddle with your siblings and to sort of share notes about what people are noticing. So maybe there's a physical concern that somebody doesn't want to address. Or, it could be, is it time to take the car away? That's its own big bucket of difficult conversation. Or it could be, wow, I'm noticing that there seem to be some memory issues. So share your notes, and then try to decide together what next steps you're going to take, so that people aren't approaching your parents from lots of different angles. Step one. Step two is, when it's time for the conversation, treat your parents the same way that you would want to be treated, which is nobody wants to be told what to do. You know, folks want to be engaged in a conversation, and sometimes this is a really difficult conversation. Many people are not comfortable with some of the limitations that come with aging, and so they don't want to talk about it. There will be times when, even after your best efforts to be an empathetic listener and a good question asker, you're not going to feel like you make headway. And sometimes it's important to say to a parent or a grandparent, it's time to do something different. And so you have to be ready to sort of rise up a little bit with your own loving assertiveness that we need to take a different path here.
Yeah. And I think that's where the professionals within the senior living realm, we may only deal with it as loved ones once or twice in a lifetime, and others may deal with it in the senior living industry. They deal with it every day.
Absolutely. Yeah, so tapping into folks who've seen it done many, many different ways and can give you the highs and lows of different approaches, that's a great way to do it, because we don't have to make it up entirely ourselves. There's so many wise guides out there and counselors who can help us think through it.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point too, because we can't answer all of the questions that you have here. We've got a lot of great resources on our blog and things like that, and those will only take you so far. Eventually you do have to seek the help of someone else. So I think that's very important as well.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that you're making a commitment, and you're not committing your mother to moving into senior living just because you're having a conversation with somebody in senior living.
Yeah.
Think about it as sort of a resource gathering time and a question asking time. What we've found over the many years that we've been in this business is folks who come in knowing what good questions to ask become great partners for us in care. And so we love to talk to people who have a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Well, it's getting late, and I'm sure that you are tired and ready to move home for the evening. And I'm sure that the people watching have more important things to do on Facebook, like cat videos and political posts and all sorts of things like that. So I want to thank you, Mary Campbell, for your time this evening. This has been fantastic, a great discussion. For those of you watching live, or if you're watching our recording, either way, thank you so much. We are here for you. We want you to know that. And we want videos like these to be a resource for you, regardless of if you live near an Arbor community, or even if you ever set foot inside an Arbor community. That our goal really is to make these transitions and these conversations easier for you. We've got plans to do more videos like this, and the best way for you to find out when we're doing these live broadcasts is to click the follow button right here on Facebook. I think it might be right below the video. And Facebook will then let you know when we've got a new live video planned. We're not going to spam your email or anything like that, but you will get a notification from Facebook. So that's a good way of finding out. And again, if you know of anyone else who could use this information, please share it with them. Mention them in a comment, and I think that can go a long way. These are topics that people can find awkward. We talked about that a little bit, and people don't know who to ask for help. And so you could be that person. Just share the video with them, and that could be a good next step to a conversation starter. Also, don't forget to download our free guide, Home for the Holidays. Just head over to arborcompany.com/holiday. Well, I think that just about does it for us this evening. Mary Campbell, happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa. Did I forget anything?
I think that does it.
There we go. Well, whatever you celebrate, we hope it's a good one. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.